Hey 302, I'm Jackie Ferris. On this week's show, we take a look at the inspiration of design, past, present, and future at the historic Reed House in Newcastle. Get out your notebooks, you're going to want to take some notes for sure. The 302 is designing your way. Hey 302, we are at the historic Reed House and we're talking about a brand new exhibition called #Inspo. But before we get into that and all the design influence this house has had, both past, present, and future, we're going to find out a little bit about its history. I'm joined by the education coordinator. That would be Rebecca Duffy. Rebecca, welcome back to the 302.
Hi, it's great to see you again, Jackie.
So let's talk a little bit about this house. Originally, it was designed by the son of the signer of the Declaration of Independence, but that's not why it's famous.
No, so this house, which is owned and operated by the Delaware Historical Society today, actually has a long history here in Newcastle. So you're absolutely right. It was designed by the son of George Reed I, George Reed II, surprising, right? Who was a signer, George Reed I, of the Declaration of the Constitution for Delaware. But George Reed II, well, he worked in law and he worked in politics and he was on the vestry at Emmanuel Church and did all these wonderful things in the community. He wasn't a signer of the Declaration, right? And George Reed I's house actually burned down in the 1820s. So this house isn't saved for its connection with George Reed I, although that is something exciting and interesting about it. It's actually saved because of its quality of design, its interest in design. George Reed II was obsessed with all of the little details, things that we wouldn't even think about, down to doorknobs and stones to put the cellar together. And he kept impeccable track of all of the records between dozens of artisans and craftspeople that worked on the space, most of which were actually working out of Philadelphia, which seems maybe a little far to us today, but when you think about the river that runs just outside the front of the house, and George Reed II did, we can talk about that maybe a little later, he was getting these fabulous top-of-the-line things from all of the most famous houses, all the most famous designers in Philadelphia, sent right to his doorstep here, and then meticulously crafting them together to create this really fabulous feast for the eyes that we still have today, right?
Because he really wanted this to be the nicest, most grand, best designed house that he possibly could. So much effort went into this.
Absolutely. He was also interested in illustrating his place in society, like so many people were in this period that had this kind of means, right? So he was bringing in bright colors. He was bringing in all these elements of punch and gouge, more so than he had seen anywhere else. He's bringing in plasterwork and compo ornament, basically a scrapbook of all the wonderful things you see at other houses, and putting them all here, just in one house.
So how long did he have the house and what happened to it afterwards?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this house actually took quite a while to build. It took from about 1797 to 1804, and even then they were still finishing some of the pieces. George Reed II lived here until he died in 1836. And then after that, there was a period of about 10 years where the house wasn't sold. It was tenanted for a little bit and then eventually purchased in the 1840s by William Cooper, who had grown up in Newcastle, but had spent much of his working life in trade with East Asia and China. And when he purchased this house, he filled it with all of these fabulous things that he had collected on his journey. So things like little tiny pieces that looked like elephants and big scrolls with brushwork on them, and giant Chinese urns, and even paper lanterns and paper cranes. He lived here until he died, and the family owned the house until about 1920. So just 100 years ago this year, it was purchased by the final owners. And I think we'll talk a lot about them a little bit later.
Sure, sure. So when people come to the house, there's so much history here.
Yeah.
And there's also, it's not just history, but it's also design.
Yeah. On the tour, we try to run people through the 215 years as best as we can to give them a sense of all of those different groups that lived here, but also that worked here or helped inspire this place too. Because you're absolutely right. Design is at the forefront of each of these owners. They're interested in what they can do to take this house that has a meaningful provenance and a beautiful shell, right, at a certain point, and fill it with something, reinterpret it from the perspective of what's popular for them, much like we would do today, I think.
It's like a living being. It just breathes and it has a new recreation with each owner.
Absolutely. And even within each owner, I mean, you can look at pictures from 1920 when the Lairds are first moving here and they're kind of interested in setting up a speakeasy downstairs, right? And then the way that as they collect more pieces, as they change the space, as they're inspired by things that they find, the way that all of these spaces change and it looks different by 1930, right? So, and that's to be said with all of the rooms here in the house.
So, you know, being immersed in history, that's your jam, that's your career.
It is.
So
I'm a history nerd.
It's a good thing. They're good to have you. So is there something that when you came here that you were like, wow, something that blew you away that maybe the average person when they walk through the doors, they may not notice that you want them to pay attention to?
When you walk through that front door, when you come here on a tour or when you come here for an interview like I did, you just have a moment of wow. It's kind of what you expected. You expected it to be a big, beautiful house, but for some reason, it just exceeds those expectations. The gilding, the details, the silver-plated doorknobs, these giant mahogany doors, right? Everything about it is so exceptional. The bright paint colors, we didn't even talk about that. This room is this fabulous kind of Tiffany blue. Who can say no to that, right?
Exactly.
And so that's got to be my favorite thing about it. But what I really love too, that maybe most people don't get to see, are the archives that are held here and at the Delaware Historical Society campus in Wilmington, with all of these decades and even centuries of photography of, I mean, that crane is one of my favorite things, and it's not here anymore. We can't see it, but thinking about hanging paper lanterns from gasoliers in a space that has this fabulous Federal arch and Palladian window and gilt sunburst, oh my gosh. It's those kind of hidden layers that we don't always see in the spaces today that I think are my favorite part.
So when you come, you really have to take time, second floor, look down the hallway, out to the water, beautiful window, all the details. You have to take your time with this place. I thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Jackie.
We'll be right back.
My name is Madison Gregg from Puppy Raisers of the University of Delaware, and puppies love the 302.
Welcome back. We're at the historic Reed House and we're talking about a new exhibition called #Inspo. I'm joined by the director of the Reed House, Brenton Grom. Brenton, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for coming by.
Now, I know #Inspo is just the beginning of a much longer title that really digs into what this is all about. Tell us about it.
Yeah, well, the rest of the title is 135 years of photographs and miniature rooms inspired by historic interiors. And we got to thinking, it's been 45 years now that we've been a museum, and it's easy to forget that this was a house for a long time before that. And it's been an old house for a long time. So all the way back to the 1840s, when the second owner bought this from the Reed family, it was considered, you know, a historic house, and people have really been inspired by it, and they've treated it with respect at the same time over the years. But each generation does this in its own way, based on its own time. So this room that we're in is a fabulous room that looks like it could have been from when the Reeds lived here, but actually it was created in the 1920s by the last private owners of the house, Philip and Lydia Laird. They were coming in as a movement called the Colonial Revival Movement was becoming really popular, and it was about looking back to the early years of the United States for inspiration. So these wallpapers are actually hand-painted wallpapers with scenes from here in Newcastle, and it was commissioned in 1927 from a company in Philadelphia.
So, as the house has gone through the ages, it's had a lot of different changes, a lot of different looks, but a lot of it has stayed the same in terms of the crown moldings and things like that. So, can you walk us through some of the things that we might see, the changes in the exhibit?
That's right. So we have a lot of historic photographs going back as far as scrapbooks from the 1880s of this house. And you see, as you mentioned, you see all the same woodwork because it's so fabulous. Who would ever want to cover that up, right? But you'll see different wallpapers. You'll see the rooms furnished with different kinds of things. That second owner of the house, William Cooper, he made his money as a merchant in the China trade. So there are all of these, ceramic wares and all kinds of things from East Asia that are decorating the house. And it feels very different from what we see in it now. But then we sort of progressed through the years, not just with photos we have, but with all the magazines that this house turned up in, especially during the Laird's period in the 20th century. This was a showplace as much as it was a private home, and it showed what you could do with decorating when you had all these historic views around you.
So, as far as the beauty, you have from the past and the present pictures that you're going to put side by side, and you did this intentionally. You had people come in and do different things. Different people do different things in different rooms. What is that all about?
That's right. So we worked with 5 photographers from the region and a few models as well to let each of these photographers stage their own creative shoots in the house. And we've done everything we could to kind of make that happen for them. What's really interesting is that we could have all these people coming in at about the same time, and yet they bring themselves to the house and they see the house through different eyes. So all of these sets of photographs from over the past few months look different. And it's fascinating not only to look at them side by side with the historic photographs, but again, to remember that everybody brings something of themselves to this space. And that's exciting. That's been true for a long time.
Now, are you hoping that when people come in that what you're doing with the exhibit might breathe a little bit of #inspo into their homes?
It could. You never know. If you look at magazines that are, coming out today that have interior design in them, bits and pieces of fashion, you'll see that people are starting to get interested in old things where for a while they weren't. We had a lot of white walls and minimalism in the last decade or so, and that's starting to fade away. And people are having a really good time looking at stuff from the past and thinking about what it could mean for them personally in the present.
Let's talk a little bit about another aspect of the exhibit, the miniature rooms, the models.
Yeah, so let's be honest, these are just really cool to look at, right? To look at all of these historic houses. They're rooms from up and down the East Coast, houses that people maybe have visited in places like colonial Williamsburg. But now we see them in miniature. And the craftsmanship is excellent. They're by a maker who lives in the Philadelphia area named Peter Kendall. But what's interesting too is to think about miniatures as a way of capturing a historic interior at a particular moment in time and sometimes through the particular imagination of the maker. So that house in Williamsburg, the Peyton Randolph house, was made a number of years ago. The model was made a number of years ago, and Peter was making it according to how the house was staged at that time. But after the fact, curators at Williamsburg did a lot of research. They did paint analysis and other kinds of things to determine that they really thought that historically the paint colors were different from the way that it was being shown, and the furniture was maybe different. So in the late 90s, they changed everything. And if you go to that house now, it looks completely different. Yet if you look at this miniature model, you see a glimpse of what it looked like for a certain time during the late 20th century when people thought that that's how it should be presented.
Now, I asked Rebecca this same question. Is there something about the house or about the exhibit that, you're in the business, this is what you do, that, kind of touched you that you think people should really pay attention to when they come to visit you?
Sometimes it's not just about any particular thing or any particular visual, it's about how you feel in spaces. The scale of this house is monumental, and you can't see it from pictures. You have to come and have yourself in the space to actually capture what the 13, 14 feet ceilings mean. And that second floor hallway that you mentioned earlier, with the window looking out over the river, the way the light comes in and then the way the light changes throughout the day, is something that we feel, but I think people have felt for more than 200 years now, and I think that's been a part of how they have approached the interiors here, and how they've been inspired to live their lives and to decorate the spaces.
All right, now we're going to take a little break, and when we come back, we're going to talk more about #Inspo.
My name is Noah, I'm from Spaceboy, and you're watching the 302.
Welcome back. We're at the historic Reed House, and we're talking about a new exhibit called #Inspo. I'm joined by the director, Brenton Brom. Now, Brenton, where did you get the title #Inspo?
Well, that hashtag is front and center, right?
Right.
And it's because we're starting to see in the last couple of years that the internet has grown up. So go back 10 years or so, we're doing all these Facebook status updates, and selfies are all over Instagram, and people are thinking, what is the world coming to, right? And then phone cameras started to get really good, and people started to find more sophisticated ways to use platforms like Instagram. So now we have all of these beautiful, beautiful images that we scroll through endlessly every day. And I think people's sense of visual culture is actually changing and becoming elevated because of this. And there are communities that grow up around hashtags, including in interior design. So people are looking for ideas. They're looking, sometimes they just want to see beautiful spaces. And sometimes, they actually become kind of aficionados of historic houses because they see them digitally. And we wanted to bring that to life in a real historic house. And we wanted to acknowledge how even, long before the days of Instagram, there has been so much inspiration in the way that we look at and photograph and share images of these gorgeous spaces.
So as far as the gorgeous spaces that you just mentioned, they're not just confined to the house. There's also a gorgeous garden in the back, right?
That's right. That's right. So the gardens weren't here the way we see them when the Reeds built this house, but by the 1840s, the second owner of the house was really interested in completing the project. So he installed gardens that were based on ideas from that time, from the middle of the 19th century, which were what we might say a little bit more romantic. So we have a very formal garden with lots of peonies and boxwood hedges and things, but then we have another section that you can kind of wander along these curving paths through the trees, a specimen park, you could call it. These spaces have been kind of transformed and kind of preserved over the years. It's a combination of things because just like a house, a garden is a living, growing thing. But it's still a wonderful place for people to come and visit and reflect and find themselves. And those really go on show in the springtime. So that's the time to come and visit not only the house, but the gardens as well.
Now, I understand that there is a special event that kind of showcases all the beauty, the natural beauty that this area has.
That's right. It's the oldest home and garden tour in America. Actually, it's been running for 96 years, and it's called A Day in Old Newcastle. So you can come and have a sort of open house experience here in the Reed House, wander the gardens. But it's not just this house, and it's not just the other museums in town. There are a lot of private houses that open their doors too. And so you can come and make a beautiful day of it on May 16th. And, you can be part of history.
And you can really get a sense of, maybe not just what one place was, but what the entire community might have been like. Because a lot of people are doing things like preserving history through their buildings and their homes.
That's right. So when the Lairds bought the Reed House in 1920, it wasn't just about this house. They actually took on the larger project of trying to organize preservation throughout the town of Newcastle. And part of it was about individual houses and preserving them and decorating them, but part of it was also about finding a new economic model for a town that had sort of become a backwater. It was just a sleepy place, and now tourism to see historic houses and streetscapes and gardens was going to become part of the livelihood of Newcastle, and that's something that's continued for a century now and is going forward.
Now, I know that keeping a home like this up and running has got to be very costly, and it's something that you want to do because you want to preserve history. So you have a capital improvement program that you're working on. Can you tell us about that?
We do. So there's so many things you don't see about what makes a museum like this run. And that includes mechanical systems like HVAC, which is the least sexy thing you can do in a museum, right? But it's actually a very major project, and it's important for preserving not only the house, but all of the fine pieces of our collection that are inside the house. And we're really fortunate, at the Delaware Historical Society to have support from organizations like the National Endowment for the Humanities. But that doesn't get us all the way there, and we certainly have been, asking our friends and neighbors if they could chip in and help us make this happen, because it's been a generation or more since these systems have been put into place, and we need to make sure that this building not only survives for the next generation, but for hundreds of years. And it's exciting to think about what kind of stewardship right now could lead to all kinds of new ideas that we haven't even imagined yet for the future.
So if someone wants to donate, where do they go?
reedhouseandgardens.org.
Okay, now you guys are you on Instagram?
We are on Instagram, and it's easy. It's at Reed House and Gardens. Same thing on Facebook.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Brendan, for joining us.
Thank you so much, Jackie.
All right. We'll be right back. For more information on #Inspo, visit reedhouseandgardens.org. That'll do it for this episode of The 302. We leave you now with a gorgeous view of the Delaware. Until next time, we'll see you on The 302.